Welcome everybody to On the Front Lines of Arizona Weather, Blizzards, Fires, and Floods. I'm going to hand this over to Brian, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen so he can share his and get this lecture going.
Thank you so much, Nikki. I appreciate it. I hope everybody can see my screen. Nikki, how's it look?
You're good.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me today. My name is Brian Klimowski. I'm the meteorologist in charge, National Weather Service, Flagstaff, Arizona. I've been working there for about 18 and a half years. So spent a little time here in Northern Arizona and am continually fascinated by the weather that we have here and the challenges in forecasting. We're going to talk about a lot of things today over the next half hour to 35 minutes or so. We're going to look at some of the outstanding weather events we've had. We're going to talk about the monsoon that was very impressive and very dangerous this past year. We're going to take a look at our winter outlook to see how much snow we might get this year, and maybe even talk a little bit about climate change in Flagstaff if we have time. Anyway, let's go ahead and get rolling. I always like to start out with October 6, 2010, when we talk about the service of the National Weather Service. This was an outstanding event in our area, the largest tornado outbreak west of the Continental Divide, and it started early in the morning on October 6th. Actually, I was awakened by a phone call at about 5:15 that morning by one of my meteorologists in the office, who called me and said, "Brian, want to let you know, we're heading to the safety shelter. A tornado is going to hit the office." Click, and the phone hung up. It's like, oh my gosh, what's going on? So I dragged myself out of bed, went to my computer, and this is basically what I saw. What you're looking at here is radar imagery of that morning of October 6th at about 5:10, 5:07. On the right-hand side is the reflectivity imagery showing essentially how hard it's raining in these areas, the basic structure of the storms, showing two large storms, one just south of Belmont, one just south of Flagstaff, University Heights, and Boulder Point. On the left-hand side is the velocity image. Now this shows the relative motion in this storm, either away from the radar or toward the radar. Anywhere you see green and red coupled very closely together is suspect for a tornado. And actually at this time, we had two areas of suspected tornadoes, one just south of Belmont, heading right for the office, one just south and west of Flagstaff, heading toward the western part of Flagstaff. Indeed, this was a very busy day. This was a day that we had multiple supercell thunderstorms lined up west of Flagstaff. Now, these storms were moving south to north, so we had repeated occurrences of strong to severe tornadic storms forming over the same location time and time again. Perhaps you were in Flagstaff on this day and heard multiple tornado warnings for the same area through several hours of the mornings. My kids were in junior high at this time, and they spent a lot of time in the shelter there at their school that morning as these storms passed so close to Flagstaff. Our job during a big event like this is to issue warnings and to warn people when hazardous or severe weather might be coming. Now, this was 10 years ago, but at that time, we were doing a lot of what's called decision support services. That is, working hand in hand with our core partners and agencies that need to make weather-dependent decisions and providing up-to-date warnings to those in the public that needed to hear them. So in this case, this was the warning that was issued around 6 a.m. for a tornado that was going to hit the Belmont area, specifying a specific time that the warning was issued and when the impacts will occur. And in this case, the tornado was going to impact near Belmont, mile marker 185 at 6:20 a.m. Well, on this morning, we actually had Coconino County Emergency Management in our office helping communicate our warnings for us. it was really an outstanding example of what we call decision support. We're working with our partners, in this case, Coconino County Emergency Management, and you might recognize Mark Christian there on the phone in the right-hand image. Essentially, what he's doing is he's calling officers on the ground. He's calling people and telling them exactly where these tornadoes are going. Now, on this day, the tornadoes were crossing one of the busiest interstates in the country, and that is I-40, multiple times. So he was actually calling, relaying our warnings, and in this case, saying, hey, a tornado is going to cross the interstate in 5 minutes or so. You better do something about it. And what they did was they actually had officers out on the interstate closing the interstate at least a mile on each side of where the tornado was forecast to cross. It was really some outstanding service, and I believe it saved some lives. It was interesting. A couple years after that, I was on my way to a spotter talk near Blue Ridge, and I was riding there with an officer who was also giving a presentation. And it so happened that he was the officer on the interstate that day stopping traffic. And he had some good stories to tell about all the really irate people that were wondering why he was stopping traffic for this little bit of rain that was happening. And then the awe-inspiring moment when he actually saw the tornado crossing the interstate about a half mile in front of him. It truly was an example of how the Weather Service can work with multiple partners to really affect our mission, which is to save lives and property. On that day, we verified 11 tornadoes. In the middle, everywhere you see a red dash is where or red path is where we have verified a tornado. Then a zoom up of the area west of Flagstaff shows where we had multiple long track EF2, even an EF3 tornado, very severe storms crossing the area that morning on October 6th, 2010. Some of the damage that we had in Belmont looked like this. We had cars thrown about, roofs torn off of houses, a lot of trees down. And speaking of trees, you go into the forest near Belmont after those tornadoes, and you saw a lot of this, just miles of trees completely blown over, snapped off, and uprooted by the tornadoes on that day. I was actually able to go up in a helicopter the next day and help survey all the damage. And it's really interesting because tornadic damage is very distinctive, and it has very, unique features to identify it as tornadic damage. And one of that is a convergent damage pattern. That is, the trees in this case that act as wind markers, the direction that they fell over is always pointing toward one another during a tornado. Well, I shouldn't say always, because sometimes you can get a downburst, which will cause local areas of divergent damage, but most tornadic damage, you'll see senses of this convergent damage pattern. And in this case, the tornado was moving in this direction. Another feature you often see in tornadic events in the forest is crossed trees. That is, two trees falling on top of each other, but the top tree is oriented clockwise from the bottom tree. This is additional confirmation of tornado damage. And you have to think to yourself, why would this happen? Why would the trees be crossed in this specific way? And when you think about it, it's because that as that tornadic circulation, in this case, moving from south to north, passed over one particular area, it would blow the trees down, let's say, toward the north and west. Then as the back end of the tornado would come through, it would blow over any remaining trees or trees that were perhaps weakened by the leading edge of the tornado in a different direction, this time from the south or toward the north and east. So they cross in that way. It's something that you often see with tornadic damage, especially severe tornadic damage in a forest. And always good to see a before and after imagery. And here's Google Maps helping us out. This is before the tornadoes occurred. This is just south of Belmont, just south of Camp Navajo. And after the tornadoes, you see several areas which are completely deforested, these stripes in the forest. So you got before and after, just the dramatic tornado damage in the forest. And these are the paths that tornado number 2 that day, tornado number 3, and tornado number 4 hit on October 6th. Now that's just one example of the type of severe weather that we get here in northern Arizona and some of the service that we provide. But the National Weather Service here in Flagstaff area reaches the public and our partners in a number of ways. The topmost image here is a picture of one of our incident meteorologists. That is a meteorologist that works hand in hand with firefighters for wildfires all across the United States. We actually sent out meteorologists to support wildfires 9 times this year for a total of about 110 days they were on fires. Last year was about 115 days, working directly with the firefighters about 16 hours a day, providing continuous briefings, continuous weather watch, if any storms, irregular winds, or anything might put any of the firefighters at danger. But there's other ways that the Weather Service directly serves our community. We were in the Emergency Operations Center, the National Weather Service Flagstaff staff, during the museum flooding, during the wildfires in the area. And we work very closely with emergency management in a number of ways during high impact weather events. Here in the bottom right, you see us down near Subai installing a weather station. Again, trying to get as much weather information as we can so we can offer the best forecasts and best protection of life and property. Now, I like to say we are they. And why is that? Because what do we hear all the time? When it comes to a weather forecast, we hear, they say we're going to get a lot of snow, or they say it's going to be super hot. Well, guess what? We are they. We are the National Weather Service, and we are the ones that are pretty much the sole source of all the weather models, of all the satellite imagery, radar imagery that we see here in northern Arizona. And you have to take a moment and just read our mission. And that is the mission of the Weather Service is to provide weather, water, and climate data, forecasts, and warnings for the protection of life and property and the enhancement of the national economy. And the enhancement of the national economy is where a lot of the decision support services come on board, where we're supporting our local county officials, ADOT, the school system, anybody that has to travel on the highway, city managers, with any decisions they might have to make given weather information. Now, our vision is to actually create a weather-ready nation. That is a society that is prepared and responding to weather, water, and climate-dependent events. I can't tell you how important it is to not only communicate, but educate our public so that they can respond when they see a particular weather hazard. You know, one that we come up against all the time in northern Arizona, well, all of Arizona and a lot of the Southwest, is flash flooding and not driving across flooded roadways. It happens every year, and we try to tell folks, if you can't see across a road, do not drive across it because you don't know how deep that water is. This year, we had 5 fatalities in northern Arizona in 5 separate flash flood events, many of which where folks were caught driving through water that was too deep for their vehicle. The job of the Weather Service, we have about 20 employees here in northern Arizona in our office. Like I said, the main job is to provide warning services and notifications, the partner support, But we also, of course, provide routine forecasts, archive weather and climate information, and we staff about 20 employees. And the areas that we forecast for is given in this map here in the area in blue. That is most of northern Arizona, just north of Phoenix, up to Mojave County, and the Las Vegas office takes care of the Kingman area and Mojave County. So we have a very large area in northern Arizona that we're providing forecasts for. But let's talk about this amazing monsoon we just had. We issued 234 flash flood warnings this year and 180 severe thunderstorm warnings, a couple of tornado warnings, and a lot of flood advisories for minor flooding. Some pictures from this year. We had a very large haboob or dust storm roll over the rim of the Grand Canyon. We had, of course, the flooding that caused the viral video of the Prius being swept down Steves Avenue. It's a very dangerous flash flood. Of course, we had all the flash flooding associated with the museum fire scar and downstream into the central and northern part of Flagstaff. We had very large hail in the area. This one was down near Lake Mary, about a 2-inch hailstone. We had the flooding along the Rio de Flag from a huge event, actually the same day as one of our museum fire floods. Then, of course, a lot of lightning. This year, I saw probably more evening and overnight lightning that I've seen in many years. And here, here's a fun fact for you. We get about 8 million, somewhere between 5 and 8 million lightning flashes in Arizona every year. Okay, so lightning is a thing here in northern Arizona, another one of those hazards that we have to be very sensitive toward. Well, when I was, let's chat about a little bit about the rainfall summary here in the monsoon. Most areas in northern Arizona had wetter than normal monsoon conditions. Here in Flagstaff, we had about 11 inches. Williams, 15 inches. It was their third wettest on record. Payson was their wettest on record with almost 15 inches as well. But a few locations in the northern and eastern part of Arizona saw less than their normal amount. Grand Canyon Airport, Window Rock were pretty dry and a little bit shy of their normal amount. So the drought still continues up there. But August 17th, 2021 was an auspicious day. This was the day that we had a huge rainfall over northern Arizona, with over 3 inches being recorded in 1 hour over the museum fire scar, causing the flooding downstream of that. But we had a much larger event over the headwaters of the Rio de Flag. We also had extensive rainfall near and in the Grand Canyon, causing extensive flooding in some of the Grand Canyon area. But let's look a little bit closer at the rainfall over Flagstaff on that day. Now, what you're looking at here is radar estimates of the rainfall on that day. Anywhere that it's pink is over about 2 inches of rainfall. And you see the museum burn scar outlined in white here. The little white numbers are actual measurements of rainfall in the area. This is actually in a rain gauge. So you'll see that one of the gauges just south of the museum burn scar had over 3.3 inches. Note that 3 inches of this fell within 1 hour. That is extremely heavy rainfall, torrential. We do not see that very often. But as heavy as that was, there was a much larger area of heavy rainfall near Fort Valley, just to the east of the Snowball Road area at the headwaters of the Rio de Flag, where we saw well over 4 inches of rain, also much of it falling within 1 hour, causing extensive flooding in the Rio de Flag. I really have to compliment city and county engineers that created the Rio de Flag drainage, because almost all of that water was actually held within the drainage and flowing through the culverts, except where they were blocked by trees or debris. But to hold back that much water was truly amazing. Now, in the aftermath of this event, we heard a lot of terms thrown around. and one of which was, it was a 100-year event, it was a 200-year event, it was a 1,000,000-year event. And we often run across a lot of misconceptions to what, let's say, a 100-year event is. So let's talk about that for a minute. So the next time you hear that term, you have a better understanding of what it means. I can tell you what it does not mean. It does not mean that we won't see another event like that in the Flagstaff area in 100 years. It does not mean that. What it does mean is at a specific location, the chance of the event happening in any given year is 1%. Understand, I have specific location underlined here, and that's very important. Okay, over a larger area, the chances of this event happening is much greater. That is, over, let's say, all of Coconino County, we'll see many 100-year events in a given year, but they're all at different locations. So the odds of it happening at any one location, let's say the Flagstaff Airport, for a 100-year event is a 1% chance every year. That's why, I often hear people say, but boy, we've had so many 100-year events in the area over the past, 10 years, things have to be getting worse. Actually, a couple things are going on, and that is we're getting a lot more rain gauges over those areas that see heavy rain. We now have many rain gauges over the San Francisco peaks due to the Schultz area flooding and the museum area flooding. So we're seeing a lot of rainfall that we did not see before. Hence, we're measuring a lot of these 100-year events that we haven't been able to measure before. So like I said, we see a 100-year rainfall event somewhere in northern Arizona almost every day of the monsoon. And also understand that it's based on available observations. When a lot of these calculations were done, it's called NOAA Atlas 14. A lot of the museum fire gauges and the Schultz gauges up on the peaks were not in place yet. So we're actually doing local research based on now 10 and 11 years of rainfall over the area to see just how common these heavy rainfall events are. All right, when I chatted with Nikki a little bit a couple weeks ago, she said she wanted to see some time lapses and see some weather in motion, and I agree. There's nothing like putting weather in motion to see the dynamics and some of the features that are at play, and truly how the atmosphere is a fluid in motion. The first one we're going to see is the Great Grand Canyon Haboob or dust storm of July 24th of this year. Okay, we'll go ahead and put this in motion. And I was on the south rim of the Grand Canyon near Desert View when I saw a storm out on the west. So I started to kick up this time lapse, and indeed it rolled right into the canyon and then blew through my location with about 40 to 50 mile-an-hour winds. Now, I'm not sure if many of you are photographers, but trying to keep a tripod in place when it's 40 to 50 mile-an-hour winds is not easy. What's almost funny about this event is I'm right on the edge of the rim here, filming as this haboob and dust storm blows through. My camera was actually blown into the Grand Canyon from this event. A little bit of down climbing, down about 30, 40 feet, I found my camera. The compact flash card was still in good shape and was actually able to see these images that appeared on it. What was interesting about this year is we actually had two large dust storms that were recorded north of I-40, which is kind of unusual. Most of the time they're well south in southern Arizona. This one was recorded near Cameron, actually just south of Gray Mountain, where I videotaped this. This one also swept into the Grand Canyon at that time and caused some pretty interesting conditions. But here, visibility went very low, winds again very strong. Dust storms can be a significant hazard over northern Arizona and cause large traffic accidents, especially between Phoenix and Tucson. Now we see a lot of lenticular clouds over northern Arizona. And here's one of my favorite time lapses of an amazing lenticular cloud display. This was back in 2016. I saw some clouds developing before sunrise and thought I would start my time lapse, pointed out the window as I headed off to work. And this is what we saw that day, just an amazing stacking of lenticular clouds over the San Francisco peaks that lasted for hours and evolved as the layering of the moisture held in place by the stability of the atmosphere led to different formations of clouds throughout that morning. This entire time lapse covers about 3 hours of time on this morning. So it's a beautiful example of the atmosphere. Another beautiful example of the fluidity of the atmosphere is the Grand Canyon inversion that that can set up most of the time around this time of year between November and December. And in this case, we had cold air in the Grand Canyon, warm air aloft, and at the interface, a cloud layer formed. So it kind of reflected the motion and the top of that cold air. And you can see that it almost acts like an ocean wave as the clouds rise up, as the air above it cools throughout that evening. Just a stunning display of the fluidity of the atmosphere. And again, one more from the Grand Canyon inversions. This was the cold air sloshing back and forth from the north rim to the south rim, to the north rim and to the south rim, back and forth early one morning, earlier the morning of that same day of the video you saw previously. But you see the clouds on the top of that cold air layer just sloshing back and forth, in and out of the north rim, south rim here, multiple times on this morning. Absolutely beautiful. And we'll end a couple of these time lapses with one more. And this is a pretty funny video. I need to tell you, this was the first time lapse video I took in northern Arizona. I took this soon after I got to the National Weather Service in 2003. So this thing is 18 years old, but it illustrates a typical monsoon day in the Flagstaff area, with the clouds first forming over the San Francisco peaks and developing there as air is forced aloft and forced to rise vertically, either by wind across the slopes of the peaks or the peaks warming up before the surrounding air mass. So clouds form over the peaks and slowly grow deeper and deeper and deeper. As the storms grow deeper, you can start to see rain start to form underneath the darkening bases of these clouds. Now, when you have rainfall in an early monsoonal thunderstorm, it often causes strong winds. And you'll see a gust of dust here very soon in this video as a strong outflow hits the location that I was shooting the video from, an outflow from this storm of about 30 to, I'd say, 40 miles an hour. Well, at the time, I just had my camera just kind of propped up on a chair. It was kind of funny, you know, it was kind of a hack job there. But the wind, of course, blew over my camera at the end of that, and I actually pretty much destroyed that little camera that I had at the time with that time lapse. You would have thought I would have learned my lesson, but sometimes you get kind of excited setting up your cameras during these big events, and accidents do happen. But let's move on. Other reminders of the power of weather and flooding in Arizona. 2009, September 10th, in Sedona, a large flash flood went through the Tlaquepaque area. I show these images over and over, just trying to ingrain it in people's minds, just how dangerous flash floods can be. And a famous before and after from the Gladiator fire This was near Crown King after they had a burn high up on the mountain and the flooding soon after. Well, I see my time is about up, so I'm going to go ahead and stop there and talk a little bit about the winter outlook, because you all want to talk about the winter outlook. And let's talk about that for just a little bit. We have La Nina conditions in place right now and forecast through the winter, and that is cooler than normal oceanic waters in the equatorial Pacific. And this tends to engender a pattern like you see here with dry conditions or drier than normal conditions across the southern tier of states, wetter than normal conditions in the Pacific Northwest and the upper Midwest and upper Northeast, and colder conditions in the upper Midwest. Now, we also had La Nina in place last year. And of course, we had a very dry fall and early winter, but winter came back with a vengeance later on in the winter and spring. That could happen again this year, but the general outlook is for, on the temperatures on the left, leaning toward warmer than normal temperatures this winter and leaning toward drier than normal precipitation for this winter. And I will go ahead and wrap it up there and take any questions that you might have at this time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Brian. And we do have a question in our chat from Jan. She's asking, what causes the smoke to settle in Flagstaff? It's been terrible in West Flagstaff the last few days, mornings and nights.
Boy, that's a great question. It has to do with two things, actually three things. Number one is, where are they doing the burning, or where is the fire? If it's close to you, you have a better chance of getting impacted by the smoke. But two other factors are going to play into this. Another one is the direction of the wind. If the wind takes the smoke into your area, that would also impact it, of course. But number three is the terrain where you are. If you live in like a low-lying area, let's say Baderville or up near Cheshire, where you're in kind of a little valley, smoke at night settles in with where the cold air settles in. So those lower areas, those valley locations, if you live in a valley, you'll be very susceptible to smoke impacts.
Okay. Any other questions out there? That was the only one in the chat. Well, I have one. I have somebody that is very convinced that contrails are not natural. So can you give us a quick explanation about contrails and why we see them and sometimes and why we don't other times?
Absolutely. Contrails are caused by the exhaust from high-flying airplanes that we see, but only when the areas that those planes are flying are near saturation or the humidity is relatively high. So in the area that the exhaust from the aircraft goes, it actually condenses ice crystals, or can condense ice crystals or water droplets that turn into ice crystals. Now, sometimes the atmosphere can be very close to saturation, and significant clouds can form from contrails. That is, once you form that first initial trail of a cloud, that can promote the development of more and more clouds. And this actually happened about 3 or 4 days ago in Flagstaff. And it happened to cause, just coincidentally, some beautiful ice halos, or those beautiful sundogs you might see, or the 22-degree halo around the sun, or in this case, it was what's called a circumzenithal arc straight up ahead during sunset, caused by the ice made by contrails.
Cool. Science is awesome.
Science is amazing.
Any other questions out there? Well, thank you everyone for coming out today. And I'm gonna hit stop the recording.